In Hasidus, there are words that represent complete ideas. This is true in any system, any body of knowledge, especially something which is abstract and metaphysical, that you have to sort of create a language where words have precise definitions that can then be used as a vehicle, as a framework for understanding the material and particularly understanding one another. And frequently within a particular body of knowledge, within a particular school of thought, the language is unique, meaning to say the very same words could be used outside of that framework and have very, very different meanings. But within inside that framework, the meanings are very precise and they're also very, very helpful. So I want to begin tonight's class by introducing us to two words and to discuss them a little bit by way of introduction, and then to apply them to what is going to be the use of these words in the Maamer, at least the part of the Maamer we're going to be learning today. And the two words are the Hebrew words mitzias versus mahus. In the Maimorim of the Rabbeim, there's much discussion on mitzias and mahus. If I understand it correctly, the previous Rebbe, made of this a big deal. The Friedrich Rebbe had a breakdown of these levels. There's mitzias hamitzias, and there's mahus hamitzias, there's mitzias hamahus, and mahus hamahus, where he created quite involved uses of these terms. And I want to discuss them enough that we'll have a sense of what these terms mean as they're going to be relevant to the discussion in the Maamer that we're going to be having. Of course, be'ezer Hashem yizbarach, with Hashem's help, without Hashem's help, nothing really happens. B'chlal, especially here. The meaning of the word mitzias is that something is. The meaning of the word mahus is what that something is. Or the word that I like to use is the substance of that thing. So the core of the word mitzias is there is something. We don't know what it is, we know it exists. The core of the word mahus is that it's not enough to know that something exists. You have to understand the substance, the essence, the mahus of that thing. For example, Hashem, simplest example. And if we wanted to complicate matters, we could talk about malachim, we could talk about neshamis, anything which is metaphysical, acharei hateva, could be an illustration of the point. When you talk about Hashem, there is the mitzias. Mitzias means that Hashem is. And then, of course, the mahus, which would be what Hashem is. And to know that Hashem is, which is called Yedias HaMetzias, or on the most basic level, Yedias Metzias HaMetzias, would be in effect simply proving that Hashem exists. The lowest level of knowing anything is simply knowing that it is. And if somebody is able to prove that Hashem exists intellectually, he knows the Metzias of Hashem. He has no idea what Hashem is, no understanding whatsoever of what he is in his essence. Obviously, Hashem means that he's the creator, he's the source that everything exists, but that's what we have from him. But what he is completely unknown in the Metzias. But it could get more involved. You can simply prove that Hashem exists, and you can also prove that Hashem must have all kinds of strengths. If he created wisdom, he has to be wise. If he created kindness, he has to be kind. If he created beauty, he has to appreciate art. If he created wonderful sounds, he has to appreciate music. It sounds simple, but if you collect it all, you have a sense of what Hashem's Metzias must be at least. So there is Metzias HaMetzias, that Hashem exists, and Mahus HaMetzias is what Hashem's existence must be at least. But when you know the Metzias of Hashem, you know nothing of the Mahus of Hashem. Because the Mahus doesn't only mean that Hashem is smart. it means how is he smart? What is the nature of his smartness? Or to say it in very fine words, which are a bit over the top, a bit extreme, a bit simplified, is how does it feel to be Hashem? How does Hashem know Hashem? Which is what Mahus is. So, when we talk about physical things, for example, a table. I know that's a very shallow mashal when the nimshal is the Eibishter, but Metzius means that a table exists. Mahus means what is a table for? Why would somebody create a table? Why would they design it in a particular fashion and what purpose they're going to serve and so on? When you're talking about a table, to know it's Metzius, it's enough to touch it or to see it. And to know it's Mahus, you have to have the intelligence to appreciate why it was designed the way it was designed and what uses it has, and then you have a sense of its Mahus. But take not a table, but a piece of art, or a table which has been decorated to be a piece of art. So the Metzius is, there is a piece of art. The Mahus is, what is this piece of art about? What is this piece of art saying? What is this piece of art representing? How is this piece of art an expression of the artist who created it? What's his message? And so on. So the Mahus is much more involved. But it's possible to understand the Mahus of a piece of art because it was designed by another physical human being. One person is capable to a great extent, if not entirely, to understand another human being and his motivations and his essence, and accordingly we can know the Mahus of a piece of art. And of course, ultimately, the best example would be there is the Metzius of a fellow human being, and then there's the Mahus of a fellow human being. The Metzius means that that person exists, or that that person is skilled in this way, that way, the other way, and the Mahus would mean, what is that person? Or to say it in different words, how does it feel to be that person? How does that person know himself? What is the Mahus? What is the Mahu? What is the substance? What is the essence of that person? And of course, one of the ideas which would come into play here is the notion of Adam Kodev Eitz El Atzmi, self-love. That Chassidus says the way a person loves himself and the way a person knows himself, Ghillie Etzem is Helam Lagabe Hazulas, nobody else can love that way and nobody else can know that way. Which is why even a Rasha, big Rasha, an evil person, can love himself. And of course, on a simplistic level, an evil person loves himself because he's selfish. But on a profound level, an evil person loves himself because the evil person knows that there's more to him than evil. And he sees and knows the good in himself. Other people may not see it, but he knows it. It's part of his mahus, it's part of his essence, it's part of his character, it's part of his substance. So when we deal with physical things, depending on what kind of physical things, we certainly know the mahus, that it is. We can even know the mahus, we certainly know the metzias, that it is. We may even be able to know the mahus metzias means what it is, what it can do, what its functions are. And because we're dealing with physical things, we can know the metzias hamahus, we can have an idea of what the substance of that being is, and maybe even know the mahus hamahus. Ultimately, to know the mahus of something, you have to be that thing. In other words, you know yourself on the highest level of mahus. Now, when I say you know yourself on the highest level of mahus, I don't mean that you've analyzed yourself and dissected yourself and broken yourself down into a bunch of categories and figured out what your substance is. I mean you know what you are as you are, in it, your essence, without having to analyze it. Because whenever you break a person down into attributes, you really take away the essence of that person, the mahus of that person. Because the mahus of that person is not a bunch of attributes. The mahus of that person is one living being. And sensing the mahus, tapping into that mahus, means knowing that being as that being is in its truth, not just in its expression. So, as I started to say, much is found in Hasidus about the two terms, Metzius and Mahus. Now let's go mystical. Let's talk now in the language of Kabbalah, or specifically in the language of Chassidus, where Chassidus explains Kabbalah as it applies to the terms Metzius and Mahus. Again, to be very simplistic, the world proves the Metzius of Hashem. You and I, our existence, our bodies, our souls, our reality, our existence, proves that God exists. There's no way for us to exist without a creator, period. It really is that simple. People love to complicate matters and call themselves sophisticated and intelligent, but it really is that simple. all creation is a reflection of the Metzias of Hashem. We are symptoms, we are proofs, we are expressions of Him, and therefore we are in effect His Metzias. Our very existence is the reality that Hashem is. And the way it would be explained and understood in Kabbalah and Hasidus, this is true not only of us physical creatures, it's true also in the world of Asiyah Ruchnis and Yetzirah Ruchnis and Bria Ruchnis till the highest madregas of Elam Abriya. Elam Abriya is already Efshari HaMetzias. Elam Abriya is already a world where godliness is not revealed. Godliness is concealed, and as a consequence, worldliness is beginning to be manifest. So beginning from the Efshari HaMetzias of Elam Abriya, these worlds, including the highest levels in Elam Abriya, as much as they're a Metzias, and they're not alakus, as much as they're separate, yesh, or shariya yesh, and not alakus, represent the Metzias of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and not the Mahus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That Hashem is, not what Hashem is. Now clearly, if we lived in El Mabriya, we'd have a much more profound understanding of what Hashem's existence is. In other words, in El Mabriya, we'd have a far greater idea of what the Mahus HaMetzias, the substance of His existence is. But when you know the substance of His existence, you know only more detail, more information about what His existence is. But how His existence is, or again, to use that cliche again, what it feels like to believe Hashem, it would be totally unknown. And only in Atzilus would you say that there's a Ghillie of Mahus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Atzilus, as we know, especially Zoh, the Eir Amp, and the Midas of Atzilus, is called Seif v'Ghillie Elam Ein Sof. There are many worlds that are Ein Seif. We've talked about this innumerable times. That Ein Seif is godliness in the framework, in the form of light, and godliness in the framework of light is the Metzias Nimtza of the Eibishter, and light, as we all understand, and we discussed it in the previous year, reveals HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but light reveals HaKadosh Baruch Hu to a Zulas, to another, to something which is not the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that other is Kelim, is the vessels. Now one of the ideas which is emphasized in Hasidus and perhaps developed and innovated in Hasidus is that the Elokus is not only mitzad ha'er, the Elokus is mitzad ha'kelim. The vessels are not godly because the light goes into them. The vessels are godly because the spark of godliness within the vessels is revealed to the vessels. In Adveikus built in Ikeres, it's called in Hasidus. So there's many levels of Elokus, many levels of godliness. And in these various levels of godliness, the light meets the vessel to create a certain form. And on higher levels, the light meets the vessel, and the vessel is more nullified, more bittled. On lower madregas, the light meets the vessels, and the kelim are less nullified or less bittled, until Atzilus, until Zoh Atzilus, which is called Ghillie. Ghillie means the light meets the vessel, and the light does not nullify the vessel, but the vessel receives it. Like a teacher teaches a student, and the student is not overwhelmed. So the world of Atzilus is unique. Again, we've discussed this so many times over the years. If you want to put it in simplistic words, here's how you would say it. Higher than Atzilus, light meets Keli, and light obliterates the Metzias of Keli. Lower than Atzilus, light meets Keli, and the Keli causes the hiding of the most of the light. All that you have left is the Metzias of the light. In between those two extremes, you have the world of Atzilus, where light meets Keli, and it's a draw. It's a tie. The light does not obliterate Keli, the Keli does not hide the light. So when the light meets the vessel, and it can't destroy the vessel, light meets the vessel, and the vessel cannot hide the light. The result of this is that this meeting creates a revelation, that the light becomes revealed to another, namely to the Keli. So Elam Atzilus is called Ghillie of the Mahus, of a Ha'ara, of Ein Seif. Higher than Atzilus would be either the Ghillie of the Mahus of the Etzem of Ein Seif, or perhaps would be even higher than the term Ghillie. But Atzilus is a Ghillie of the Mahus, of a Ha'ara of the Ein Seif. Light, godliness in Atzilus shines and reaches the vessel. In a way, the vessel is inspired by that light, not destroyed and obliterated by that light. And it doesn't hide the light, but rather it conducts and reveals the light. So the light, which is Ein Seif, is representative of Mahus of Elokus. In other words, if you would experience Ein Seif, you would have a sense of what it feels like to be godliness. But it feels like to be God. Now I know that that's so silly and so without context to make a statement like that. The point is, we're describing Oyer, light. Oyer is one. Oyer is not a bunch of pieces. It's one thing. And what is Oyer? It's a reflection, it's a revelation of what the Eibishter is. But in Oyer, there is Ein Sof and a way of Mahus. Ein Sof and a way of Mahus means that light not only knows that it represents the Metzias of the Eibishter, light not only reveals that Hashem exists, but light actually reveals what Hashem is, the Mahus of Elokus. Again, to be simplistic, what it feels like to be the Eibishter. So in the Shamas of Atzilus, have Ruach HaKodesh, have Nevuah, have inspiration, which is of course L'mayla min HaSeichel, above the human mind. Because they're not only knowing the Eibishter by way of Metzias, that Hashem is, even if that Hashem includes how powerful He is and how great He is and how much good He's done, but you only know Him by His symptoms, as opposed to an Elam Atzilus, which is called the Ghillie of a Mahus, of a Ha'ara, of Ein Sof. You have a sense of the Mahus of Ein Sof, what the experience of Ein Sof is by itself. When the Maimori Chassidus discussed this, and I've told this to you many times, that this is really at the heart of the Haskell of Chassidus Chabad. Chassidus is trying to explain to us Kabbalah. And we've had opportunity to point out that Chassidus is explaining us Kabbalah not because he's interested in Kabbalah, but because through the medium, through the garment of Kabbalah, Chassidus comes to explain what Chassidus is, which is even deeper and higher than Kabbalah, like I've discussed in a number of the Stump the Rabbi sessions that we did recently. So Chassidus is trying to explain to us what it means, the Ghillie of the Mahus of Ein Sof and Atzilus. And in doing so, they give us two examples, two illustrations, two mishalim. These examples need much study, much analysis. In other words, you have to really think about these examples in a personal way, not in an objective, cold way, as you see them in yourself, to have a sense of the mashal. And after you have a sense of the mashal, then you have to be mafshid, hadvarim, migash miyusa, you have to strip away the mashal and try and get at the nimshal. And what are the two mishalim? The first mashal is ratzon, or willpower, and the second mashal is tainug, or delight, pleasure. And the way it's explained in Chassidus, of course, this is discussed at very great length in Hemshech Tafresh Samach Vav. In the first mashal of willpower, of ratzon, you have a sense of how powerful Ein Sof is, how strong the Eibishter is. Just like the willpower of a person is infinite, just like the willpower of a person is so powerful that it's not reasonable, it can't be limited by reason, it can't be contained by reason, and it can't even be motivated by reason, as they come from the neshama. So in Ein Sof, there is a power which is infinite in terms of its urgency. So in ratzon, you have reflected really the most of the Metzias of Ein Sof, how strong Ein Sof is. When you know how strong Ein Sof is, you don't know what Ein Sof feels like, you just know how powerful Ein Sof is. And the second mashal is the mashal of tainug, pleasure, delight. And over the years, again, we've had many opportunities to discuss the mashal of tainug. And in short, the mashal of tainug is nisala ba'atzmusei. The experience of pleasure is going up into the neshama. You eat food and you feel good, your neshama, you rise up to a higher level. You listen to music and you feel good, you rise up to a higher level. You learn a deep, abstract idea of Chassidus and you understand it correctly, you rise up to a higher level. And the higher level really means you going back into your own neshama. And as we've discussed many times in the past, the experience of pleasure is experiencing your own infinity, the infinity of your own neshama, which is why when people experience pleasure, they temporarily feel like they're lacking nothing, because they're raised above the world of chesaron to the level of the neshama, which is not chesed. In other words, in pleasure, there is an experience of you on the highest level of yourself. And you on the highest level of yourself has everything. It's very rich. And it feels very good. But that richness is nondescript. That richness of the neshama doesn't have aspects. In that richness, you don't have ideas. In that richness, you don't have feelings. In that richness, you don't have sensitivity, sensuality, sensual things. In that richness, you have everything, as it's experienced as one. And this becomes the mashal, understanding the tainug, by a person to appreciate what the mahus of Ein Sof is, or the mahus of the mahus. In ratzon, you can understand the mahus of the Metzias of Ein Sof, how powerful the Ein Sof is. And in tainug, in experiencing pleasure, you have a sense of the Reichkeit, the richness, the Mahus of Ein Sof, or at least the Metzias Mahus of Ein Sof, perhaps the Mahus of Ein Sof as well. So, in the language of Chassidus, when you're in the lower worlds, you're in the worlds of Metzias, that means to say these worlds tell you that Hashem exists. When you're in the higher world, namely Atzilus, and higher than Atzilus, you're in worlds of Mahus. You not only know from where you are that Hashem exists, you have a sense of what Hashem's existence is, because you're experiencing Ein Sof, and you experience Ein Sof, you're experiencing the Mahus, or the Tainug of what the Lakus is. Now the way Tainug works is that it has many levels and layers. This Tainug HaMorkav and this Tainug HaPoshet. This Tainug HaMurgish, Tainug HaBilti Murgish. This is discussed in Samach Vav at length, but it's also discussed in the Lachoshech of the Rebbe from Tafshin Yudala, the Chassan and Maamer, that he said 25 years after he got married. And the way Tainug works is, the higher and the deeper the thing that elicits the Tainug, the quieter and the less experienced the pleasure will be. Pleasure on lower levels is not even called oinig, it's called nachas ruach, that the neshama comes down. Pleasure on the higher levels is called tainug, and tainug means that your neshama is going up into its source. So the deeper the pleasure, the finer and the quieter it is. Just to explain it physically, for example, everybody understands that there's a huge difference between the pleasure of eating fast food, like chips with ketchup or pizza, versus eating very, very fine fish or meat or whatever the case may be. That when you're eating simple food, cheap food, it's very, very well seasoned. The tastes are very pungent, very strong. The odors are very, very strong. And it takes a lot to stimulate pleasure in the person who's eating that food. When a person is eating finer food, so to be very frank, an unrefined person, an unskilled person, an unsensitized person will find the food to be very bland, almost tasteless, because the taste is very fine. Only a person who has a fine palate, who's accustomed to eating such refined food, will experience the pleasure of such a food. And of course, the point is that you don't want to taste the ketchup, you want to taste the fish, you want to taste the food itself. And it's a much more sublime pleasure, it's a finer pleasure, it's a higher pleasure, it's a deeper pleasure. And it represents a mashal for Ein Sof, which is more nuanced, more subtle, more edel. So lower pleasures are called murkavim and murgashim. Higher pleasures are called pshutim and bilti murgashim. The highest pleasure is called in Chassidus tainug habashut habilti murgav habilti murgash klal. The very highest pleasure is experiencing Ein Sof on such a sublime level that not only is it not connected to an experience, it's not a pleasure that comes from eating or from drinking or even from learning. It's a pleasure from a lakus itself. Bilti murkav, and it's also called bilti murgash. You can't even feel it. The highest pleasure is so deep that it's totally quiet. But when it's totally beyond feeling, that's experiencing the oneness with Hashem, which is the deepest pleasure, although it almost is imperceived. It's almost not felt. So lower pleasures are connected to things that inspire them and they're more experienced. Higher pleasures are less connected to things that inspire them, or not at all connected to things that inspire them, and they're felt less until it's such a high pleasure that you cannot feel it at all. In other words, when you talk about the Mahus of Hashem, not the Metzias of Hashem, that God exists, but the Mahus of Hashem is what God is. The highest truth of the Mahus of Hashem is something that should not be possibly known by any creation. Why? Because the Mahus of Hashem is not only Posha B'tachas Apshitus, but it's Beheder HaGilui, Beheder HaIspashtus, and Beheder HaMetzias Legamri. There's no form, no expression whatsoever. And as a consequence of this, it's totally quiet. So to summarize, Metzias means the lower worlds where you know that Hashem is. You may even know something about what He is, but you don't know His experience of Himself. You don't know His Mahus. Mahus begins in Zoh of Atzilus, Seva Ghillie, Ilmes Ein Sof, and higher. We are not only experiencing that Hashem is, you're experiencing what Hashem is. What's the experience of being a Lakus? And on the lower levels where it's more Ghillie, it's more Murkav, and it's more Murgish. And on the higher levels where it's less Ghillie, it's less Murgav, less Murgish, until the highest level is Einig HaPoshet HaBilti Murkav HaBilti Murgish Klal. So, as we proceed in this Maamer, with the last 25 minutes that I've shared about the words Metzias and Mahus, I have one more thing to say by way of introduction before we go to the Maamer proper. And as I pointed out yesterday, we're not going to be reading the Maamer in order. We're in effect reading the Maamer inside out, as I'll get to momentarily. So as everything that I just said applies to the Maamer, there's two ideas. Number one, the Metzias of Oyer versus the Mahus of Oyer. And number two, how Oyer reflects the Metzias of the Eibishter and how Oyer reflects the Mahus of the Eibishter. In other words, there's two separate ideas here. The first idea is Oyer, Getlichkeit, godliness. What is godliness? A revelation of the Eibishter. Whatever the Eibishter is reflected in light. We've discussed this so many times. Light is totally bottled to its source. It has no self-identity. Its whole reality is revealing its source. That's the concept of Oyer. So Oyer, when you talk about the lower worlds, I mean, it's Bia, Bria, Yetzirah, Asir versus Atzilus. The lower three worlds are Metzias, Oyer is Mahus. When one is holding the level of Ein Sof, which is basically the level of Ruach HaKodesh, the level of Nevuah, they're experiencing the Mahus of Getlichkeit on some level, the spirituality of godliness to some degree. So the lower worlds are the Metzias and the higher world is Mahus. But that's only when you're comparing an Oyer to an Oyer. But then there's a higher level. When you compare Oyer to Moyer. In other words, just like you can compare and contrast worldliness versus godliness, Bria, Yetzirah, Asir versus Atzilus, you can also compare and contrast godliness versus God. In the Lashon of the Maimorim, Gott und Getlich, Hashem himself and his light, which means Atzilus to Atzmas Mahus. And here the same thing repeats itself, but at a much higher level. That understanding or appreciating or experiencing Ein Sof is the Metzias of Elokus. And the experiencing the Eibishter himself, Moir, is experiencing the Mahus of Elokav, what the Eibishter is. So it's two levels. The lower level is that the worlds are the Metzias and Elokus is Mahus, but Mahus is in a state of Ghillie. And the higher level is that the Mahus, which is in a state of Ghillie, relative to what the Eibishter is only a Metzias. And the Eibishter is by himself is a Mahus. In other words, when you talk about Ein Sof, it gets complicated. Even though the standard understanding is an Ein Sof, which is godliness, the reflection of the Eibishter, and so on and so forth. And it carries the Mahus. Now we're saying that in Ein Sof there's two levels. In the lower levels, the Ein Sof is carrying the Mahus of Elokus, but it's only the Metzias of the Mahus of Elokus. And the Eibishter himself, which the Ein Sof is not able to carry, not able to be revealed, is similar to the idea of the Mahus of Elokus, or the Mahus of Elokus. How do you explain this? How do you give this language? And of course, the answer to the question is as follows. Oyer is El Azulas. Light, by definition, assumes another. You can't have light without someone to receive the light, or light serves no purpose if nobody to receive the light. And the recipient of the light is the vessel, and the light is the one who gives warmth, the light the one who gives illumination, and ultimate light is the one who gives life. So light goes from a source to a recipient, to a makabel. So light communicates what its source is to another. In communicating what its source is to another, there's two aspects. The higher aspect is source, and the lower aspect is communication. In other words, I'm talking to you, and I'm trying to teach you a Maamer, and it may look easy, but it's not so easy. It's a big struggle to explain this Maamer. The point is not that I should talk. The point is that you should listen, and very, very importantly, you should understand what I'm saying. So in order for me to teach, and with Hashem's help, you should be able to appreciate and understand what I'm saying. I have to apply myself to you. So it's not that important what I know. It's important what I'm able to teach you, what you're able to understand. And naturally, in any Rav-Talmid relationship, anytime there's a teacher-student relationship, you have to assume the teacher knows more than the student. And therefore, the teacher is communicating to the student isn't everything the teacher is, it's this of the teacher that the student can know. So Oyer is revealed to another, and this other happens to be Kalim of Atzilus, and as I mentioned earlier, Kalim of Atzilus may be Elokus, but they are Zulas Agabe Oyer. So Oyer of Ein Sof, as it comes into Atzilus, is shining and reflecting itself on a Keli, which is another, and it is being revealed. Inasmuch as that is concerned, on the one hand, the Oyer is Megal the Mahus of Elokus. On the other hand, because it's Megal the Mahus of Elokus to a Zulas, it's reduced, it's tzimtzum. And compared to what the Mahus of Alakus is by itself, it's considered Metzias. That means, when you interface godliness versus worldliness, godliness is Mahus and worldliness is Metzias. But when you interface godliness versus God, godliness becomes Metzias. Even though godliness is revealed in the Mahus of Alakus, it's only revealed in the Mahus of Alakus as much as Oyer and Ghillie can tolerate. What is Etzem is lost. And this is the scheme of this Maamer. The scheme of this Maamer starts with an assumption that all Madregas of Ein Seif at the Mahus of Alakus, and that's true. Every Madrega of Ein Seif, as long as it's Atzilus and higher, is revealing not just that God exists, but what the Mahus, what the substance, what the pleasure, what the delight of the Eibishter is. But on the other hand, because it's being revealed, it's considered Metzias HaMahus. Something has to be lost, or a lot has to be lost, in bringing the Eir to the Kli. And relatively speaking, the only true Mahus is the Mahus of the Eibishter himself. So Eir compared to worlds is Mahus and Metzias. Moir compared to Eir is again Mahus and Metzias. And the levels of Ein Seif, the three levels of Ein Seif, which our Maamer are going to talk about, are going to be separated by this. Our Maamer is not going to talk about worldliness at all. Our Maamer is only about Eir. It's a very high Maamer, a very lofty Maamer, a very esoteric Maamer, a very exalted Maamer, as I explained to you in the previous class. And he's going to speak different levels of Ein Seif, three levels of Ein Seif. And what's going to separate one level of Ein Seif from another level of Ein Seif is whether this level of Ein Seif is only the Metzias of the Mahus of Alakus or the Mahus of the Mahus of Alakus. Now, having given you this lengthy introduction, let's begin. We're going to begin on page Shin Lamed. We're starting now from the beginning, from the Shin Lamed. Second paragraph, first full paragraph, third line where it says Ulahoir. This is where we're beginning. Page Shin Lamed, Pei Gimel, first paragraph, third line where it says Ulahoir. Says the Rebbe Ulahoir, I want to observe the Behadru Shalad Moir Marshab Nishmas Yeden. This Maamer is from Tafshin Chavdal from 1964, some 50 years ago, 50 some years ago, 53 years ago. And in Tafshin Chavdalid, when the Rebbe said this Maamer, as I discussed at length in the previous class, Tisha B'Av was on Shabbos. And the fast day was pushed off to Sunday. And of course the halacha is that you're not supposed to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av, because of the union of Pekudi Hashem Yisharim Esamche Leiv, but the Rabbeim said Chassidus and take a very deep Chassidus. So on Tisha B'Av itself, which was Shabbos, the Rebbe Rashab said is very, very involved Maamer about the three Madregas of Ein Seif. 50 years later to the date, the Rebbe said a Maamer, which is presumably or apparently or superficially a Chazorah, a repetition of the Maamer of the Rebbe Rashab, but it's actually quite different. Observes the Rebbe that this Maamer, Shenemar b'Shabbos Tisha B'Av Nitcha. It was said on the day of Tisha B'Av, which was Shabbos, and because of course it was Shabbos, it was pushed away. In Mestama, you all know what the Gemara says, and the Rebbe brings it in so many siches. That there's a Das Rebbe, there's the opinion of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who says, Kiven the Itche, once a Shabbos doesn't let you fast, and of course we believe that everything is Ba'ashgacha Pratas, everything is precise and perfect. And there can be no contradictions in the Eibishter's world. Since there's one master, there can't be any conflicts over what he masters, what he oversees. So the Eibishter arranges in his world that Tisha B'Av is a Shabbos and he's not letting you fast. It's a message that there's no need for a fast. So when Tisha B'Av is Shabbos, there's a concept of Kiven the Itche. Of course, the halach is not like Rabbeinu HaKadosh, like Rebbe. It's like the Chachamim that in Zman HaGolus, when a Tzoyim, when a fast day is on Shabbos, that means Shiva B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Yov and Tzem Gedalia and Tainus Esther. So you fast either the next day or the days before V'cholu and so on. So even though you're fasting, the philosophical, the conceptual idea of Kiven the Itche is applying. So this is a Maamer which was said by the Rebbe Rashab and repeated by the Rebbe on Tisha B'Av, which is Shabbos. Ulahoir observes the Rebbe shebehadrush shel admor nishmas yeden shenemar b'Shabbos Tisha Nitcha, on this day of Tisha B'Av, which was postponed, meduber binyan. The entire Maamer is discussing the concept of Ein Seif. And like I explained to you at length in the last class, that the Rebbe Rashab introduces us to three Madregas of Ein Seif, which are going to mirror what we're going to be learning today about our three madrigas of Ein Sof, but the basic context of the Rebbe Rashab is to discuss all three madrigas of Ein Sof in contrast to Ghillie. And when you compare Eir to Ghillie, even though Eir has levels, all madrigas of Eir are the inyan of Ayin and Bittel and Aliyah and Istalkus, and Ghillie is inyan of Yerida and Amshacha and Gilui and Metzias and so on. Our Maamer, which is based on the Rebbe Rashab's Maamer, is also going to be discussing three madrigas of Ein Sof. But the Rebbe is not comparing Eir to Ghillie, he's comparing Eir to Eir. And because our Rebbe is the same but different than the Rebbe Rashab in the reciting of this Maamer, he is the same because he's talking about Eir. He's different because he's only comparing one Eir to another Eir, and there's really no comparing Eir to Ghillie. We're going to have a very different idea of what Ein Sof is. So the Rebbe says, Shabbos, Tisha B'Av, you talk about Eir. The Yeshleimer says the Rebbe, the Ashayich is Inyan Zel Tisha B'Av Nidchu, the fact that there is a Maamer Chassidus, that the Rebbe writes and prepares and says, and we learn, of course, on Tisha B'Av, is not coincidental. It's not just the way it works out, but because it has to do with the Teichen of Inyan of Tisha B'Av. Ki Tisha B'Av shechol b'Shabbos v'nidche. When Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, it's pushed away. And as I mentioned before, the concept of the fast day pushing away is not that Shabbos doesn't let you fast. It's the Eibishter declaring that this year on Tisha B'Av there's no need for a fast. It's only the Rapi Halacha. It's pushed off to the next day. In other words, when Rebbe says Kivan de Itche Itche, that's the truth of Torah, even if it's not the Halach. L'maisa we fast, but be'inyan we're not fasting because Shabbos is not letting us fast. Says the Rebbe, who misugel the idea that Shabbos prevents you from fasting is a schooler, is a treasure, lifel to a fact, she'yanitcha lagamri, that the day of Tisha B'Av and the darkness of Tisha B'Av should be pushed away completely. U'dechias u'bitl ha'golus hu al yedei Eir, the pushing away and the ultimate bitl of golus on the various levels of bitl, which was discussed in the very beginning of this Maamer, which we haven't learned yet, and will be in Shem discussed more elaborately at the very end of the Maamer, which we're also going to get to, is this bitl is yedei Eir. So the Teichen of Tisha B'Av Nidche is the same Teichen as Eir. Just like Tisha B'Av Nidche is pushing away the fast day because of something else, the Choshech HaGolus is pushed away by Eir. But when Tisha B'Av is pushed away by Shabbos, you fast the next day, and you certainly fast the next year. After Mashiach comes, when Tisha B'Av is postponed, you don't fast anymore. And of course, the Nimshal is that Oir pushes away Choshech, light pushes away darkness, the way Shabbos is pushing away Tisha B'Av, and the way Mashiach is going to push away Tisha B'Av. So a Maamer Chassidus on Tisha B'Av talks about Ein Sof, because the Maamer of Chassidus on Tisha B'Av is discussing the inyan of Tisha B'Av as it's going to be nullified by Elokus, which is going to be revealed in the world, and take away the inyan of Avelos, the inyan of Choshech, the inyan of Tisha B'Av, and so on and so on. But there's three madrigas of Ein Sof. And because there's three madrigas of Ein Sof, the notion of Eir pushing away Choshech has different levels. And as the Rebbe is going to explain, there's a level of pushing away Choshech temporarily, but tomorrow, if the Eir goes away, the Choshech will come back. And this idea of pushing away Choshech, that the Eir pushes away the Choshech in such a manner that the Choshech will never be able to return. And that's going to be the difference between one madrega of Eir and another madrega of Eir. The lower madrega of Eir is going to push away Choshech in a more superficial way, in a metzias way. In other words, the metzias of the Muhus of Elokus pushes away Choshech, which is the metzias of metzias, but only temporarily. And the higher madregas of Ein Sof, which is going to reveal the Muhus of what Ein Sof is, or the Muhus of the Muhus of Ein Sof, is going to push away Choshech in such a fashion that Choshech will never be able to exist again. Now we could be mafalpul in this, we could analyze this, we can go more deeply into this. And I don't want to speak about this at length, but I do want to touch it very, very briefly. As I mentioned to you a moment before, and again we're going to see it in the later classes on this Maamer, Oir pushes away Choshech, light pushes away darkness. And the highest madrigas of light push away darkness in such a way that there's no room for darkness to ever to be able to come back again. In Chassidus, if you think about it, there's two concepts. One concept is the godliness of light pushing away the darkness of the vessel. And the other concept is the godliness of darkness itself. HaChoshech atzma yar, the elokus of Choshech itself. Our Maamer is going to speak about three madregas of Oyer, how all three madregas of Oyer are pushing away Choshech. The lower madrega of Oyer pushes away Choshech to 1 degree. The middle madrega of Oyer pushes away Choshech to a greater degree. And the highest madrega of Oyer pushes away Choshech completely. But it's all Choshech being nitche mepnei Oyer. Deeper than all these three is the Lachoshech of Choshech itself, which would be the godliness of Ghillie itself. This, our Maamer is not going to explore at all. Our Maamer is not going to explore it at all. To use fancy language, the three madregas of Eir could be explained as Ein Eichlacha, Ein Zulascha, and Efes, Biltecha, which the Rebbe is going to mention on the end of the first paragraph on page Shin Lamed Beis. But the idea of the godliness of Choshech itself, which is the union of Midei Melach, is not in this Maamer at all. Because there's only three madregas of Eir, there isn't the fourth madrega of Eir. In other words, this Maamer, even though it's going to speak a lower Eir and a higher Eir and a still higher Eir, and the difference between one madrega of Eir and the second madrega of Eir and the third madrega of Eir is going to be the nature of the disposal of Choshech in the presence of Eir, whether it's temporary or it's permanent. But this Maamer has a limit. This Maamer doesn't talk about everything. The very highest madrega of Eir, which disposes of Choshech in such a way that Choshech will never be able to come back again, is still the disposal of Choshech because of Oyer. And higher than everything discussed in our Maamer, there's Choshech being dispelled by the Lachoshech of Choshech itself. This is beyond the parameters of this Maamer. I'm just putting this in to give a context that even a Maamer as abstract and encompassing and esoteric as the one we're learning also has its limitations. Ad kan Maamer HaMuzge. This is the end of that. Now let's go to the Maamer itself. Umevuer b'haMaamer. In the Maamer of the Rebbe Rashab, Tzion b'mishpat Poda Aderes Tafrei Shayin Daled, 1914, which the Rebbe is now repeating and saying again and saying originally and saying with much distinction, difference from the Maamer of the Rebbe Rashab in Taf Shin Chov Daled in 1964. The Maamer is going to explain the inyan of Oyer. Umavur ba Maamer. The Maamer says the Oyeru ayin bitl. The idea of Oyer, the idea of light, the idea of godliness is that it's ayin. Ayin on the lower level means we don't understand. The lower level means that it's impossible to understand what it is. And ayin on the higher level means that in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu it's nothing. In other words, inyan bitl. Oyer is light. And of course, so much of Chassidus is discussing and analyzing and trying to understand Oyer, beginning of course with Hemshech Chafar Shamach Vav, and so on and so forth. There's so much discussion about Oyer is. Oyer, in other words, is Alakus, is Getlichkeit, godliness. And you and I, and all of us, over the course of the years that we've been learning now, almost 6 years or 7 years that these shurim have been going on, we've had repeated opportunity to explore the meaning of the word Oyer, because it's really at the heart of understanding Seidis HaTeira, Pnimiyas HaTeira, Nishmas HaDerais, and so on. What is Alakus? What is godliness? So again, we're going back to Kabbalah and Chassidus 101, which we of course done so many times before. Until the revelation of Kabbalah and Chassidus, there was a theology which is called Seichel, Mechkar, Philosophia. Before Kabbalah was revealed and known, the theological framework that people who engaged in theological study, whether they should have or they shouldn't have, was a philosophical one. And within the parameters of the philosophical model, there's only two things. There's Boirei and Nivra, the creator and the creation, Hashem and the world. Everything but Hashem is world. And when you talk about a reality that consists of a creator and creations, there is absolutely no bridge, there's no proximity, there's no closeness between the creator and the creation. The creator is a non-existential existence. In the words of the Rambam, Matzi Leibe Metzias. In the words of Chassidus, Metzias, Bilti Metzias Nimtz. Hashem's existence has no relationships, no interdependencies, and no expressions. His existence is entirely in relationship with himself. And there are all kinds of creations, from pebbles and droplets of water to neshamas and malachim and all the rest. But even the most sublime of creations is a nivra, is a creation. And a creation is limited. It's limited that it has a body or a form of some sort. It's limited that it's contained within time and it's contained within space. And its most basic limitation, or its deepest limitation, is that every creation's center is itself. Whether it's a pebble, or it's a malach, or a neshama, the essence of each being is self, yesh. Yedim is atzmam, v'achakach yedim is ilasam. Their first truth is themselves, the second truth is their creator. So when you understand the theology of philosophy, of Bechkar, you understand that there's no such thing as closeness between a creator and a creation. The creator is totally removed from creation, and the most sublime of creations, the loftiest of creations, is a yesh and a metzias nifred, b'fnei atzmai. So within the parameters of philosophy, that know only Obeidei and Nivra, creator and creation, when we talk about a creation getting close to God, it's a bit of a misnomer. It's not true. You can't approach God, because God is Boidei, God is Matzah Lei B'Metzias, God is Metzias built in Metzias Nimtza, and there's no interaction, there's no meaning, there's no connection whatsoever to creator and creation. So within the scheme of philosophy, in other words, the pre-revelation of Kabbalah model, the pre-mystical model of Jewish theology, there is no idea of a creation getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is only a creation getting closer to its own potential, its own possibility. In the language of the Chazal, Mahu Chanun Afata Chanun, Mahu Racham Afata Racham, God has good midas, kindness, compassion, sensitivity. But of course, when you say God has good midas, that's also a misnomer, because He's a built-in Metzias Nimtza. But the goodness in the creation is considered an expression of Him, and the weakness and the evil in creation is considered a symptom of a lack of His expression. So the more refined and the more good you are, the closer you are to God. But it really doesn't mean the closer you are to God, that means the closer you are to your ideal self, because there's no such thing as coming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in this model, where all there is Beidei and Nivra, we say Aveda Tzedek Aveda B'Tmiyah. In other words, Torah and mitzvahs have no impact on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They make no difference to Him. Yiddishkeit, Torah, mitzvahs make no difference to Him whatsoever. Why did He create it? He created it for us. Torah mitzvahs teaches us midas, tevis, good character. And on a higher level, Torah mitzvahs teaches us deis nechenes, deis isharas, good values, good ethos, good philosophy, good knowledge of the truth. But to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the Eibishter Himself, it makes no difference. Torah mitzvahs is mitzvah teva, tevla heitiv, and kavitz chesed, and all these other reasons, where Torah mitzvahs are serving only us, they're for us. This is true without Chochmas HaKabbalah, Chochma Nestara, Chochmas HaEmes, Torah HaEmes. Then comes Kabbalah, and as I've told you so many times over the years, Kabbalah adds one idea to the mix, that between Boidei and Nivra there's something in between. That entity in between is called a Lakus, godliness. Or in an applied sense, Ma'atil Ne'etzal, the emanator and the emanation, godliness. Godliness is not God, because godliness is an expression of God. Godliness is not God, because godliness shines and reveals itself to us, as I emphasized particularly in the last class, the first class I gave you on this Maamer, my introductory class. So godliness is not the Eibishter, because Hashem's existence is totally unavailable. The whole concept of godliness is Hashem as He makes Himself available, the revelation of Hashem. But godliness is not a creation either, because godliness has no self-centricity. Godliness has no yesh. Godliness does not begin with himself. The entire reality of godliness is that it reflects and reveals what the Eibishter is. To use the terminology which is so frequently used in Hasidus, that when you're talking about Elokus, you use the word dveikus. When you're talking about godliness, use the word dveikus. Dveikus is translated in English cleaving, attached, stuck to. But the contextual translation of the word dveikus, and I discussed this at length in the Hemshech of Maamorim that I gave earlier this year, on the Rebbe's Maamorim, of course, from Tafshin Tezvav, those very, very involved Maamorim from Shmini Atzeres and Bereshis and Yites Kislev and so on, that the meaning of the word dveikus is something whose entire reality is to represent something else. Dveikus means that oid is not reflecting itself, it's reflecting its source, period. And it's not a choice. It's not I exist and I choose to represent my source. My existence is the representation of my source. Oid has no reality other than that it's revealing what the Eibishter is. The I, the capital I, of Oid is Moed. The I of a human being is himself. The I of a malach is also himself. The I of a neshama is also himself. The I of a lakus is a lakah. Godliness. So godliness is not a lakah, it's not the gut, as it says in the Maamer, but God is not a nivri either. It has no time, has no space, has no goof, and most importantly, the center of itself is not itself, the center of itself is the Yevish, is its source. It's called Batal B'Metzias, Batal B'Muhus. His entire reality is its bittul, it's being a representation of its source. That's the inavoid. So, once you introduce to the scheme Elokus, Matzeh L'Netzal, that in between Baidi and Nivad there's an intermediate entity which is Elokus, so now you say Aveda Tzedek B'Nechusa like it's brought in Aveda Sakedesh, and then of course it's repeated in Maamer Chasidis, and everybody knows it from the Maamer of the Rebbe from the early years, Leitiyim Shakelef, Dafshin Beis, which is based Takan Hemshachayim Beis. One of my modern which speaks the sugya of Va'avadatem Avaya Lekechem, which is the inyan of Aveda Tzedek Avei B'Nechusa. In other words, when we serve the Eibishter benefits from our Avodah. Avodah Tzedek Avaya, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. When we serve Hashem, Hashem benefits. But in Kabbalah, when you say Aveda Tzedek Avaya, Hashem benefits, you don't really mean Hashem, you mean Hashemliness. The Torah and mitzvahs are not only good for us because they give us good midas, they give us good deis, but because Yichud Kodesh Baruch Hu Shechintei, that we do Torah and mitzvahs, we create unions in Atzilus, more Elokus is revealed. And without going into the Arichas HaDover, in Chassidus, it's not only Aveda Tzedek Avei B'Nechusa, that the Torah and mitzvahs that we do touches godliness, but actually the Torah and mitzvahs that we do touches God Himself. Aveda Tzedek Avei means Atzvus and Hussein Tzedek Baruch. So the whole Yiddishkeit and the whole understanding of what Yiddishkeit is, and the whole point and purpose of Yiddishkeit, changes fundamentally when you introduce a lakus. Without a lakus, it's all about us. Hashem makes no difference to Him. With a lakus, it's also about us, but it's about Him as well. And in Kabbalah, it's about Him, His oir, and in Chassidus, it's about Him, not only the oir, it's also the Yinam Moir. So godliness or oir changes the total understanding of what Yiddishkeit is, the total understanding of what the point and purpose of Yiddishkeit is, and the total understanding of what it means having a relationship with the Eibishter or not having a relationship with the Eibishter. And the key chiddush, the key novelty, the key difference between Yiddishkeit without Kabbalah and Yiddishkeit with Kabbalah is inyan ha'oir. That oir or eir ain't safe, godliness changes the entire truth and the entire understanding of the relationship between a Yid and the Eibishter and a Yid. So the Rebbe says in the Maamer, the Eiru Ayin, Bittel. The concept of Oyer, the concept of Eir ain't safe, is in Bittel. But over here, Bittel doesn't mean I'm serving Hashem, I'm subservient to Hashem, what we like to call Bittel Ayesh. Because I'm serving Hashem, I'm subservient to Hashem, which is Bittel Ayesh, is not real Bittel. I am. The center of me is me, and I'm giving it away to the Eibishter. And even when I'm giving it away to the Eibishter, and even after I've given it away to the Eibishter, I'm really still me, I'm just giving it away. Bittul means I am no longer am. My reality is not me, it's Him. Which is not Bittul Ayesh, it's Bittul B'Metzias, or Bittul HaMetzias, or Bittul HaMahuz. Where I am transformed into being an expression of Him. And in truth, the inyan of Bittul B'Metzias, the idea that something exists, and that the center itself isn't itself, b'mehusay, but that the center itself is a lakus, is only an Erein Seif. And that's the meaning of these 5 words, u'mevuer b'hamaimed, the Rebbe Rashab says in this Maamer Tzin Mishpati Poder, which is a Maamer about Erein Seif, the Eiru Ayin. The concept of Ayin is Ayin. Ayin means it's beyond comprehension. Ayin means that in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's nothing, bittul. But what kind of bittul? Not a bittul where you're giving yourself to the Eibishter, a bittul where there's no you other than that you're expressing the Eibishter. And he continues, the difference between light and vessel is she'eru ayin v'keli yesh. Keli is designed to be an entity unto itself. Keli is designed to be self-centered. The essence of Keli is Keli. And Oir is designed to be God-centered. The essence of Eid is not itself, but its source. Now, of course, this gets very tricky, because we hold, Chassidus holds, based, from what I understand, on deeper madrigas and understanding Chachmas Kabbalah, that the bittul of Keli is not only because of Eid, the bittul of Keli is because of Keli itself. So when you call Keli of Atzilus Yesh, it's a bit of a misnomer, because Kelim of Atzilus are not Yesh, Kelim of Atzilus are Batal B'Mtzias. But because it's a Dveikas built in Ikeres, when you look at Keli superficially, you see Metzias, you see Yeshus. As opposed to Eid, even when you look at Eid superficially, you see a Metzias whose entire inyan is its Makar, is its Ayin, is its Bittel. And that's why Eid is Bittel and Keli is Yesh. Now, this class was planned to include the next 2 pages of Maamer, but it's taken us almost an hour to give. So I'm going to stop now. And it's really stopping in the middle of a class. In other words, I'm dividing one class into 2 parts. And B'linei Shem, next time we'll do the 3rd part of this Maamer, which is, I would like to think, in principle, the 2nd part of the 2nd class. But in closing, at least, let me review what we've said so far. What we've said so far is that when you compare godliness to worldliness, godliness is mahus and worldliness is metzias. But when you compare God to godliness, godliness is metzias and God is mahus. The problem is, the complexity is, the difficulty is, that when you're talking about the mahus of oir, there's a Ghillie, you can have some sense of what that mahus is, and the mashal was tainug, hamurkev, and so on. But when you're talking about the mahus, and the mahus is the Eibishter, if the mahus is the Eibishter's mahus is the built-in Metzias Nimtza, which is very, very difficult to relate to and understand. And in Mitzvah Shem, in the next class, you'll see why I gave this introduction, and you'll appreciate the subtlety, the edelkeit of what the Rebbe is going to try and explain to us. So this was the introduction. And then, of course, the 2nd part of the class, we explored the inyan of Oid as it relates to Lachoshech, as it relates to Tisha B'Av, and as it relates to Ghillie. And the Mitzvah Shem will continue next time.